President Lee Jae-myung is pressing ahead with his diplomatic schedule in Hanoi, holding talks with Vietnamese leaders to broaden cooperation across key sectors and advance shared interests. Korea's economy recorded its strongest quarterly expansion in 5.5 years in the first quarter, buoyed by robust exports and steady domestic demand. The White House is pushing back on reports suggesting a set deadline for the extended ceasefire, saying President Donald Trump has not established any fixed timeline. We begin once again in Hanoi, this time with a look back at Wednesday's summit between President Lee Jae-myung and Vietnam's leader To Lam. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min has our top story tonight.
President Lee Jae-myung, who is on a state visit to Hanoi, was given a red carpet welcome by To Lam, Vietnam's top political leader. The friendly mood was reflected in Wednesday's summit.
당 서기장께서는 지난해 우리 정부 출범 후에 첫 번째 국빈으로 방한하셨고 또 이번 저의 베트남 방문은 베트남의 새 지도부 출범 후 2주 만에 이루어진 베트남의 첫 국빈 방문으로
Your visit, Mr. President, clearly shows our comprehensive strategic partnership that is based upon strong, effective, and deep trust.
Amid the current tensions in the Middle East, the Korean president said Korea and Vietnam will work together on energy and infrastructure based on profound mutual trust.
최근 중동 상황에서 비롯된 공급망 불안정성 속에서 양국 간 협력의 필요성이 더욱 커졌다는 데 공감하였습니다. 에너지 안보 강화와 공급망 안정을 위해 더욱 긴밀히 협력하기로
A dozen MOUs were signed on energy, infrastructure, and technology, including power infrastructure and nuclear power plants.
Vietnam welcomes Korean companies expanding investment in areas such as infrastructure, smart cities, semiconductors, large-scale AI data centers, nuclear power plants, smart ports, and next-generation ports.
The two countries plan to cooperate on the Ho Chi Minh City Metro Railway, with South Korea's Hyundai Rotem set to play a major part in this $110 million project. Korean firms are also eyeing urban development and airport projects in Vietnam. By 2030, Seoul and Hanoi aim to expand their annual bilateral trade to $150 billion. The two countries signed an MOU to allow exports of heat-treated poultry products, to expand cooperation on agricultural and food products. People-to-people exchanges was also on the agenda.
상대국 국민과 다문화 가정의 안정적인 체류와 권익 증진을 위해 긴밀하게 협력해 나가기로 하였습니다.
We also have agreed to share experiences on culture and entertainment industries, such as film, music, and gaming, and bolster mutual support.
It was the two leaders' second engagement in about 8 months, following the Vietnamese leaders' trip to Korea last August. The South Korean president's reciprocal visit to Vietnam so early in his presidency is seen as carrying symbolic significance in terms of Seoul's strategic priorities. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Hanoi.
And after meeting Vietnam's top leader To Lam yesterday, President Lee Jae-myung met with other senior members of the country's leadership today. He's also meeting business leaders from both countries at the Korea-Vietnam Business Forum. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
Continuing his diplomatic push in Vietnam, President Lee Jae-myung on Thursday held a series of high-level meetings with the country's number 2 and number 3 officials. Lee first met with Prime Minister Lee Min-hung, who oversees the country's economy and administration. Talks focused on deepening economic cooperation, with President Lee presenting South Korea as a reliable partner in supporting Vietnam's rapid growth.
과거에 한국은 원전을 통한 에너지 자립, 고속도로 및 철도를 통한 물류 혁신, 그리고 투명한 금융 결제 시스템이라는 세 가지 핵심 인프라에 집중 투자했습니다. 이러한 물리적, 제도적 토대의 결합이야말로 한국이 단기간에 경제 도약을 이뤄낸 결정적 엔진이었습니다.
Vietnam is pursuing strategic breakthroughs in policy, human resources, and infrastructure, while placing the private sector at the center of economic growth. We hope South Korea will work together with us in supporting these efforts.
Prime Minister Lee Min-hung also invited South Korea's Prime Minister Kim Min-seok to visit Vietnam, with President Lee saying he would convey the invitation and work to arrange the visit soon. Lee later met with National Assembly Chairman Chun Ting-mun, Vietnam's top legislator, where he emphasized the role of Parliament in furthering Seoul and Hanoi's comprehensive strategic partnership.
양국 간 협력이 제도적으로 뒷받침될 수 있도록 양국 의회 간의 교류도 더욱 활성화되기를 기대합니다. 베트남 내 우리 국민의 권익 증진과 한국 기업들의 경영 활동 개선을 위해서도 국회에 지속적인 관심과 지원을 부탁드립니다.
This marks President Lee's first visit to Vietnam since taking office, and the first state visit since Vietnam's 16th National Assembly completed forming its new leadership. It reflects the high importance Vietnam places on its relationship with President Lee, the South Korean government, and South Korea.
As these meetings come just weeks after Vietnam's new administration took office, they are seen as efforts to set a positive tone for bilateral ties in the years ahead. 송유진, 아리랑 뉴스.
Staying in Hanoi, First Lady Kim Hae-kyung was hosted by her Vietnamese counterpart Phang Lee by Lee for cultural exchanges. Together, they visited the Vietnam Museum Ethnology on Thursday and toured the exhibition featuring Vietnam's traditional culture and customs. They also exchanged the cultural similarities between Korea and Vietnam. Kim was wearing a pink áo dài, Vietnam's national dress, presented by Lee as a gift. They also watched a water puppetry show and wished for a deeper friendship between the two countries. The U.S. is refraining from setting a firm deadline for talks with Iran, even as the pressure intensifies through an ongoing naval blockade and rising tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. Moon Hae-ryun explains.
The White House says President Donald Trump is in no rush to lock in a timeline for negotiations with Iran, despite reports suggesting otherwise. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters on Wednesday there is no firm deadline for Tehran to submit what the U.S. has called a unified proposal, dismissing claims of a 3 to 5 day window as inaccurate.
The president has not set a deadline himself. Ultimately, he will dictate the timetable.
According to Fox News, Trump has also rejected the idea of any time pressure, saying the ceasefire extension will remain in place as long as needed while talks continue. Instead, officials say the timeline will ultimately be determined by the president, as Washington waits for clarity from what it describes as a divided Iranian leadership, split between pragmatists and hardliners. While direct military strikes have paused under the ceasefire, the broader pressure campaign has not. The White House says its naval blockade and economic measures remain fully in force, targeting Iran's oil exports and shipping routes. Leavitt described the blockade as a key source of leverage, claiming it is inflicting significant economic damage and limiting Iran's ability to move oil through its main export hub. Even as negotiations stall, U.S. officials argue this strategy is strengthening their position, with Trump reportedly viewing the ongoing economic squeeze as more effective than continued bombardment. But beneath the diplomatic standoff, a more complex and potentially long-lasting challenge is emerging in the Strait of Hormuz. According to the Washington Post, Pentagon officials have warned lawmakers that clearing sea mines laid by Iran could take up to 6 months and may not even begin until the war formally ends. The report, based on a classified congressional briefing, suggests more than 20 mines may have been deployed, some using GPS technology that makes them harder to detect. That assessment raises concerns that disruptions to one of the world's most critical oil routes could persist well beyond any ceasefire agreement. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Seoul has engaged Tehran in talks aimed at securing the safe passage of vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and the protection of Korean nationals remaining in Iran. The special envoy held talks with Iran's foreign minister on Wednesday. Oh Soo-young has more.
Seoul's diplomatic envoy to Tehran, Jeong Byung-ah, has met with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to discuss the safety of Korean citizens and vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. The Foreign Ministry says the meeting was abruptly arranged and held on Wednesday in Tehran.
The special envoy's visit can be seen as part of our strengthened efforts to achieve a swift stabilization and restoration of peace in the Middle East. Second, it demonstrates our firm commitment to ensuring the safety of our nationals residing in Iran, as well as our vessels operating in the Strait. Lastly, it reflects our determination to maintain and further develop bilateral relations, even under these challenging circumstances.
The Korean envoy strongly requested Tehran's attention on the protection of Korean nationals in Iran. Arachi said Iran would take continuous interest in the matter. Tong also raised the need to ensure free and safe passage of all vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, as over 24 Korean flagships remain in regional waters. The envoy further expressed hope that the resumption of negotiations between the United States and Iran would lead to the early restoration of peace and stability in the region. Arachi expressed appreciation for South Korea sending an envoy even during difficult times, and the Korean embassy in Tehran continuing to operate despite the war. Both officials agreed on the importance of bilateral ties and the need to continue developing the relationship. Appointed as the special envoy of Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, Tong has been in Tehran for nearly 2 weeks, engaging with senior officials for political, economic and consular affairs. Minister Cho has held 2 phone calls with Arachi since the crisis broke out in late February. The Foreign Ministry says it will continue diplomatic communication with Tehran at various levels. Oh Seong, Arirang News.
Findings for the first quarter of this year show the Korean economy posting its strongest quarterly growth in over 5 years, driven by private spending and overseas shipments. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
According to the Bank of Korea's advanced estimate on Thursday, the nation's real gross domestic product grew by 1.7% from the previous quarter. On a yearly basis, it's grown 3.6%. This significantly outperforms expectations and overcomes concerns over the situation in the Middle East, which severely hit South Korea's energy and petroleum sector. In fact, this quarter-on-quarter figure is nearly double the central bank's earlier projection of 0.9% and marks the highest growth rate since the third quarter of 2020.
To summarize the first quarter growth, private consumption acted as a pillar of support, while strong exports centered on semiconductors and investments to expand semiconductor production capacity drove the overall growth.
Looking closely at the data, the manufacturing sector expanded by 3.9%. Overall exports surged 5.1%, heavily fueled by global demand for information technology products. This resulted in net exports contributing 1.1 percentage points to the overall economic growth figure. Domestic demand also showed a solid recovery, adding 0.6 percentage points to the GDP. Facilities investment climbed 4.8% and construction investment rose 2.8%. Private consumption grew by 0.5%, supported by increased spending on goods like clothing. Additionally, real gross domestic income surged 7.5% on quarter. This marks the highest increase since the first quarter of 1988, indicating a significant expansion in the nation's purchasing power due to improved terms of trade. Meanwhile, the government attributed this strong performance to both favorable market conditions and active policy interventions.
In addition to strong exports driven by the semiconductor boom, policy effects such as capital market revitalization and consumption support measures contributed greatly. I also believe our swift response to the Middle East war played a part.
He added that as ceasefire negotiations are delayed and uncertainties remain high, the government will not let its guard down. Prior to this release, the Bank of Korea had projected an annual economic growth rate of 2.1% for the year. But with the positive surprise growth in the first quarter and the negative impact of the Middle East situation expected to become clearer in the second quarter, the public now waits to see which factor weighs the most on the annual growth rate. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's two chip giants, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, have announced their earnings for the first quarter of 2026, with SK Hynix reporting its results earlier today. Both companies have recorded all-time highs in revenue and operating profit. For more on how the companies have performed over the first quarter, we have our business correspondent Park Junan here in the studio. Welcome back, Junan.
It's good to be back, Tommy.
So, Junan, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have delivered what can only be described as a phenomenal results. Now, what are the numbers exactly? Tell us more.
Sure, let's break down the numbers. Let's start with SK Hynix. The company's revenue was 52.58 trillion won, or around $35.5 billion US dollars, a massive 198.1% jump from the same period last year. SK's operating profit saw an even more dramatic rise as it reached 37.61 trillion won, up 405.5% year-on-year. That follows Samsung Electronics' record-breaking announcement earlier this month. For Samsung, its revenue was 133 trillion won, up 68.1% from the same period last year. What's more surprising is that its operating profit was 57.2 trillion won, a 755% increase year-on-year, marking the single best quarterly result in the company's history. To put both numbers together, the two Korean chip makers just generated roughly 95 trillion won in operating profit in a single quarter. That's nearly 14% of South Korea's entire national budget for 2026 in just 3 months. And what's interesting is that Samsung ranked third in operating profit, while SK Hynix placed sixth globally. Samsung Electronics' quarterly operating profit was only behind US tech giants Apple and Nvidia. SK Hynix generated more operating profit than US megacaps like Amazon and Meta. In fact, experts believe that Samsung could achieve the #1 spot in global operating profit if projections hold and memory prices continue to rise in the coming quarters, as widely expected. Let's take a listen.
That's because fixed contract prices are likely to trend higher on average. And as mentioned, NVIDIA's new products are set for a full rollout in the second half of the year. Given that volume is expected to be much larger in the second half than in the first, this is why Samsung's operating profit could exceed 300 trillion won. If that happens, as you said, the company could rank #1 globally in terms of profit.
However, since stocks are a leading indicator, an increase in profit does not necessarily mean stock prices will rise.
In 2026, performance is likely to keep improving each quarter, but if growth starts to slow or flatten, the stock price could come under pressure.
Well, so while companies are garnering big profits, investors should keep this in mind when making investment decisions.
Now, market momentum seems incredibly strong with chip prices skyrocketing and long-term supply contracts being signed. Junan, the question is, what is the fundamental force driving this rally, and are we anywhere near the peak of this entire cycle?
Right, Tammy. So let's look at March export data. So basically, memory prices have risen more than 600 to 800% year-on-year, which means demand for chips far outpaces the supply that the two companies can provide. But why do companies keep buying chips from Samsung and SK Hynix if they're already so expensive? Let's take a listen to what an expert said.
Only a handful of companies can produce HBM, including Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and US-based Micron, which means Korean firms hold more than half the market and are close to dominating it. Chinese companies do make similar products, but their performance still lags. So for high-performance memory, buyers largely rely on Korean suppliers. As AI moves into the inference stage and demand for high-performance computing grows, memory demand is expected to keep increasing.
In short, the most advanced technologies attract global capital, giving companies greater bargaining power when setting prices.
Well, while the numbers are record-breaking, Chuna, what are some variables that could lead to slower demand or even earnings for both Samsung and SK Hynix?
Well, even if the prices are going up, right, so that is one of the issues we should focus on, as a sudden drop in demand could trigger a drastic price decline. Here's what an expert said.
On the demand side, if a major hyperscaler falters, that's a key risk. And for general consumers, higher prices could reduce demand. Another concern is that Chinese players could rapidly gain market share if they catch up faster than expected. Korea remains highly competitive in advanced process technology. However, in less advanced areas, Chinese firms are catching up quickly. If that gap narrows faster than expected, it could become a risk going forward.
A planned strike by Samsung's labor union could serve as one of near-term volatilities, as workers are demanding performance-based bonuses that match the company's strong results. If the strike, scheduled to run for 18 days from May 21st to June 7th, goes ahead, it could lead to tens of trillions of won in operating losses, as well as potential supply disruptions, making it a short-term risk factor.
Right, that could be a variable. Chunan, thanks for the wrap-up. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Tami.
A U.S. military commander has said South Korea will meet the conditions for wartime operational control transfer from the U.S. by the second quarter of Washington's fiscal year 2029, while also advancing plans to expand Korea's role as a regional sustainment hub. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
South Korea and the U.S. aim to meet the required conditions for the transfer of wartime operational control to Seoul no later than the second quarter of the U.S. fiscal year 2029. This is according to remarks made on Wednesday local time by General Xavier Brunson, the U.S. Forces Korea commander, when answering a question from the U.S. House Armed Services Committee.
That right now we've delivered to OSW a roadmap which will get us there not later than second quarter of FY29. And we'll continue to pursue that. As you know, Chairman, we have the Korea Integrated Defense Dialogue that's upcoming, where a great many of these conditions will be discussed. We've also got the military consultative meeting and the security consultative meeting, which are also coming up to be held here in D.C. early in the fall.
The U.S. government's fiscal year 2029 runs from October 1st, 2028 to September 30th, 2029, meaning the allies aim to meet the conditions between January through March 2029 for Korea's fiscal year. He also said South Korea is in a strong position for the transfer, with defense spending set to rise about 8.5% over the next 3 years. Regarding the commander's remarks, South Korea's defense ministry said Thursday that the timing of the OPCON transfer will be decided at the security consultative meeting before being submitted to both presidents for approval. Aside from OPCON transfer, the USFK also talked about designating South Korea as a regional sustainment hub to expand maintenance cooperation.
One thing I would like to mention as I go forward is our continued emphasis on things like a regional sustainment hub because of the importance of sustainment to the region.
Emphasizing how South Korea's defense industrial base has developed into one of the best in the world, Brunson underlined how the U.S. can alleviate the burden of distance by leveraging Korea's defense industry for MRO, or maintenance, repair, and overhaul. Regarding upgrades and maintenance, South Korea has already been supporting these domestically for U.S. military aircraft, such as F-16, F-15 fighter jets, and CH-47 Chinook helicopters since 1978, and the written statement hints at possible agreements regarding other assets, including Patriot missile systems, drones, and T-55 aircraft engines. He did, however, point out that this plan would require close coordination with the state and defense departments and congressional approval for a special repair authority to allow some U.S. equipment to be serviced in Korea. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The government will freeze wholesale petroleum prices for another 2 weeks, keeping gasoline capped at 1,934 won per liter and diesel at 1,923 won. Now, the decision to maintain these price levels aims to manage domestic demand and protect the economy amid global market volatility. Authorities dismissed the possibility of scrapping the price controls in the near term due to ongoing instability in the Middle East. Officials estimate that without this ongoing intervention, gasoline would currently cost around 2,200 won per liter and diesel up to 2,800 won. This is the government's fourth round of maximum price controls for petroleum prices for refiners to provide to retailers. The government plans to fully compensate local refineries for production cost losses. Finance Minister Gu Yun-chul and the Bank of Korea Governor Shin Hyun-sung held their first meeting today following Shin's inauguration earlier this week. At a breakfast meeting, the two officials laid the groundwork for closer cooperation between their institutions. Shin warned that growth and inflation are moving in opposite directions, calling for a carefully crafted mix of monetary and fiscal policies. Gu, for his part, stressed the importance of close coordination and policymaking, particularly on the exchange rate.
We're looking at a sunny day tomorrow with fine dust levels ranging from good to moderate. So it'll be a great day to get out and enjoy some fresh air. Temperatures are gradually warming up, But inland areas will see big day-to-night temperature swings of around 20 degrees, so you may want to keep a jacket handy. Meanwhile, alerts have been expanding, with dry weather advisories now in place across parts of the central regions, including Seoul. There's also a strong wind advisory along the eastern coast of Gyeongsang-Bukdo province, so please take extra care. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 8 degrees, Chuncheon at 5 degrees, Busan at 11 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 24 degrees along with Chuncheon and Daejeon. Looking ahead, we'll see plenty of sunshine toward the end of the week, with temperatures gradually rising. There is no rain in the forecast through the weekend, so dry conditions will persist, along with those big day-to-night temperature swings.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.